The Galactic Military Academy floated in the darkness of space like a metal flower. It was huge. Over 40 different alien species sent their best young soldiers here to learn about war. The station had been teaching combat for 3,000 years. Its instructors had seen everything, or so they believed. Instructor walked into the great lecture hall with confidence in his 4 arms. He was a species known for their height and their many limbs. His blue skin was marked with scars from old battles. His 6 eyes could see in every direction at once. He had taught at this academy for 200 years. No student had ever surprised him. Today, 300 cadets filled the curved seats of the hall. They came from dozens of worlds. Some had scales, some had fur, some had no solid form at all. In the third row, sitting alone with empty seats on either side, was a human female. Her name was Park. She was 23 years old. She was the only human in the Advanced Combat History program. The other cadets did not sit near her. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only discovered space travel 300 years ago. Most species saw them as children playing in an adult world. Was used to the empty seats. She did not let it bother her anymore. Activated the holographic display behind him. Weapons appeared in the air. Beautiful weapons. Plasma lances that could cut through starship armor. Graviton hammers that could crush a tank with one swing. Neural disruptors that could kill without leaving a mark. The cadets made sounds of appreciation. These were the tools of modern war. Then changed the display. The new images showed simple metal objects, long pieces of sharpened steel, short curved blades, pointed daggers. They looked ancient. They looked primitive. They looked like something a child might make from scrap metal. Several cadets laughed. Raised one of his 4 hands for silence. His voice filled the hall through the speakers built into the walls. He did not need to shout. The technology carried his words to every ear. These objects were recovered from a dead world called Earth, he said. This was the original home of the human species. Before they joined the galactic community, before they built starships, before they learned to be civilized, they used these crude tools to kill each other. More laughter from the cadets. Did not laugh. Her dark eyes were fixed on the display. Her hands were still on her desk, but something had changed in the way she was sitting. She had become very, very still. Continued his lecture. He talked about how primitive species always went through a blade period before developing real weapons. He talked about how metal swords were inefficient, requiring physical strength and close contact. He talked about how modern warfare had evolved beyond such barbaric methods. The human species, he said, kept using these primitive tools for an unusually long time, perhaps 11,000 years. This suggests a certain slowness in their development, a resistance to progress. They seem to enjoy the violence of close combat. We can be grateful they have now joined civilized society and abandoned these savage ways. Some of the cadets turned to look at. They expected her to be embarrassed. They expected her to look down at her desk. Instead, she raised her hand. Paused. In 200 years, no cadet had ever interrupted his weapons lecture. He blinked his 6 eyes slowly, considering whether to ignore her. But the rules of the academy required him to acknowledge questions. He nodded. Instructor said. Her voice was calm and clear. It carried through the hall without any electronic help. May I examine one of the blades? Silence, complete silence. The other cadets stared at her like she had asked to eat a live animal, felt a strange sensation he had not experienced in many decades. He was curious. For what purpose? He asked. I want to understand something about the balance, said. The way the weight is distributed. I cannot tell from the hologram. Considered refusing, but he was curious now, and perhaps it would be educational for the other cadets to see a human fumble with the weapons of her ancestors. He walked to a secure cabinet at the side of the hall and removed an actual artifact. It was a straight blade, about 3 feet long, wrapped in old leather at the handle. The Academy records called it a Korean ceremonial sword. Did not know what Korean meant. Earth had been divided into many tribal regions. He did not care to learn the details. He handed the blade to. The other cadets watched with wide eyes. Some of them had never seen a human hold a weapon before. Took the sword. The change was immediate. Her grip shifted to a specific position on the handle. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Her weight moved to the balls of her feet. She was not holding the sword like a curious student examining an artifact. She was holding it like it belonged in her hand. Like she had held one before. The laughter died completely. Even cadets who knew nothing about combat could see that something was different. The human female was not fumbling. She was not confused. She was examining the blade with the focused attention of an expert. Turned the sword slowly. She tested its weight by moving it through the air. She looked at the edge, the point, the way the metal was shaped near the handle. Her movements were small and precise. She wasted nothing. "Instructor," she said, still looking at the blade, "why is this balanced like this?" Felt uncomfortable. He did not understand the question. A sword was a sword. It was a piece of metal with a sharp edge. What was there to understand about balance? "The weight distribution," continued. "It is concentrated here near the upper third of the blade. This is not how you would balance a ceremonial object. This is not how you would balance a tool for cutting food or plants." She finally looked up at him. Her eyes were dark and steady. "This is how you would balance a weapon designed to cut through armor, through bone, through formations of soldiers moving in tight groups." The hall was completely silent. "This is not ceremonial," said. "This is a killing tool, a very efficient killing tool. It was designed by people who spent generations figuring out the best way to end human lives." She held the sword up so the light caught its edge. "Who told you it was ceremonial?" Had no answer. The records had always said ceremonial. He had never questioned them. Why would he? It was just a primitive human weapon. It did not matter. But looking at the human female holding the blade of her ancestors, he was no longer sure. Placed the sword back in his hands. Her movement was respectful but not submissive. She returned to her seat without another word. The other cadets watched her with new expressions on their faces. The empty seats around her no longer seemed like rejection. They seemed like caution. In the security center of the Academy, Admiral watched the lecture through hidden cameras. She was a species covered in silver scales that rippled when they felt strong emotions. Right now, her scales were moving constantly. She had been monitoring the human cadet for weeks. Park's test scores were exceptional. Her physical assessments were surprising. Her combat simulations showed unusual patterns that the Academy computers could not classify. Now she understood why. Admiral turned to her aide, a young who was still learning his job. Her voice was quiet but urgent. "Find me everything we have on human blade combat," she said. "Everything. I do not care if it is classified. I do not care if it is incomplete. I want every record, every video, every historical document." Her scales rippled faster. "And contact the Coalition Defense Council. Tell them I am requesting an emergency research authorization." Her aide looked confused. "Admiral, these are just primitive weapons. Why would the Defense Council care about ancient human swords?" Admiral looked at the screen. Park was sitting in her seat, taking notes like nothing had happened, but the other cadets were still glancing at her with uncertain eyes. "Because that human knew more about that blade in 30 seconds than our experts have learned in 3 centuries, Admiral said. "And I want to know what else we have been getting wrong about humans." She watched the screen for a long moment. "I want to know what else they remember." The archive room was cold and quiet. It was buried deep in the center of the Academy, protected by walls thick enough to survive a nuclear blast. This was where the Coalition kept its most important records. 40 million years of galactic warfare were stored here. Every battle, every weapon, every tactic that any species had ever used. The human section was very small. Researcher was a species with gray skin and large black eyes built for reading in low light. He had worked in the archives for 60 years. He had never paid attention to the human files before. They were too new, too unimportant. The humans had only been in space for 3 centuries. What could they possibly have that mattered? But Admiral had given orders, so opened the human files and began to read. At first he found what he expected: primitive weapons, simple tactics, a species that had spent most of its history fighting itself instead of exploring the stars. The humans had been divided into hundreds of tribal nations, each with its own language and customs. They had fought constantly. They had killed millions of their own kind. Felt slightly sick. Most galactic species had stopped internal warfare long before they reached space. The idea of killing your own kind was disturbing. It suggested something broken in the human mind. Then he found the combat records. The first file was labeled Battle of, almost skipped past it. What could a single battle from a primitive world teach him? But the numbers caught his eye. 13 ships against 333. Check the file again. Surely this was an error. No commander would fight with such impossible odds, but the record was clear. A human naval officer named Yi had faced an enemy fleet that outnumbered him by more than 25 to 1. His ships were smaller. His weapons were weaker. By every calculation, he should have lost. He won. Read the details with growing disbelief. He had used the water currents against his enemies. He had positioned his ships in a narrow channel where the larger fleet could not use its numbers. And when the enemy came close enough, his sailors had boarded their vessels and fought hand to hand with swords and spears. 333 ships against 13, and the 13 had won. Saved the file and kept searching. He found another record labeled Thermopylae. This time, the odds were even more impossible. 300 warriors against an army of over 100,000. The 300 had held a narrow mountain pass for 3 days. They killed more than 20,000 enemies before they finally fell. Every single one of the 300 died. They knew they would die before the battle started. They fought anyway. Felt his hands shaking. He was not a soldier. He was a researcher. But even he could understand what these numbers meant. These were not normal combat statistics. These were not the actions of a rational species. He kept reading. The files seemed endless. There were records of siege battles where humans held castles for months without food or water. There were records of soldiers who refused to surrender even when their bodies were broken. There were records of warriors who ran into enemy formations alone, killing dozens before they were finally brought down. And then there were the Blade Masters. Found a file on a human named. He was not a soldier. He was not part of any army. He was a wandering philosopher who had mastered the art of sword fighting. According to the records, he fought over 60 duels in his lifetime. He won every single one. He killed his opponents with wooden swords, metal blades, and once with a boat oar he had carved into a weapon while sailing to meet his enemy. The estimated kill count for his entire life was over 300. One human with a sword, 300 dead. Closed the file and sat in the darkness of the archive room. His large eyes hurt from reading. His mind hurt from trying to understand. He had studied galactic warfare for 60 years. He had read about battles involving millions of soldiers and weapons that could destroy planets. But nothing had disturbed him like these simple records of humans with metal blades. They were not just violent, they were efficient. They had spent thousands of years learning exactly how to kill each other. They had turned murder into an art form. And now they were part of the coalition. The door to the archive room opened. Admiral walked in, followed by a human male. He was young, perhaps 30 years old by human standards. His name was Han. His file said he was a doctoral candidate in human history. He had been assigned to help explain the findings. "What have you learned?" Admiral asked. Tried to organize his thoughts. There was too much. Too many battles, too many impossible victories, too many dead. "They are not what we thought," he said finally. "The humans. They are not a primitive species that accidentally discovered space travel. They are something else entirely." Hans smiled slightly. It was not a happy smile. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the display console. Admiral nodded. Activated the main screen. Images appeared. Weapons, armor, training manuals, battle formations. The archive room filled with the history of human violence. "The problem," said, "is that galactic species have been categorizing human weapons by appearance instead of function. You see a metal blade and you think primitive. But humans spent approximately 5,000 years doing nothing but perfecting these tools." He pulled up an image of a sword. It looked similar to the one Park had examined in the lecture hall. "This is a," said. "It was used by Korean military officers for close combat. The balance point is set specifically for cutting through armor plates. The edge geometry allows it to slice through bone without getting stuck. The length is optimized for fighting in tight formations where there is no room to swing wide." He changed the image. A different sword appeared, curved and elegant. "This is a Japanese katana. It was designed for speed. A master could draw this blade and kill an enemy in a single motion that took less than 1 second. The curve of the blade creates a natural slicing action. You do not need strength, you need precision." Another image, a heavy European. "This was designed for fighting enemies in full metal armor. The weight allows it to crush skulls through helmets. The point can be driven through chain mail. Warriors who use these swords trained for decades. They developed techniques that are still being studied today." Admiral interrupted. "Why are you telling us this? These are just old weapons. We have plasma cannons and graviton bombs now." Nodded. "Yes, and that is exactly the point. You have spent the last 100,000 years developing weapons that kill from a distance, weapons that keep you safe, weapons that remove the need for personal courage." He paused. "Humans spent 11,000 years developing weapons that required us to look our enemies in the eye while we killed them." The room was very quiet. "The blades are not primitive," continued. "They are perfected. Humans tried every possible variation. We tested every type of metal. We experimented with every length and weight and balance point. We killed millions of our own kind to learn what works best." He looked at Admiral directly. "Your species stopped killing each other when you invented better technology. Humans kept killing each other after we invented better technology. We kept using blades because sometimes we wanted to." Felt a chill run through his gray skin. He had researched violent species before. The galaxy was not a peaceful place, but this was different. This was a species that had chosen violence even when they did not need it. "The records you found," said Tu, "are just the beginning. We have 11,000 years of documented warfare, manuals that teach exactly how to kill in over 400 different blade styles. Techniques passed down through families for generations. Some of these methods were kept secret for centuries because they were too effective." Admiral's scales were rippling rapidly. "Too effective, what does that mean?" Pulled up one final image. It showed a simple drawing from an old book, a human figure in a fighting stance, holding a sword in a specific position. "This technique was developed by Korean sword masters approximately 600 years ago," he said. "It was designed specifically for one purpose, to kill an enemy in full armor before they could complete a single attack. Masters who learned this technique were forbidden from using it in duels because it was too lethal. It was only to be used in real battle, when survival mattered more than honor." He let that information settle in the room. "We do not share these techniques with outsiders," said quietly. "We barely share them with each other. But you should understand something, Admiral. The human cadet in that lecture hall, Park, She recognized that sword because her family has been training with those blades for 700 years. She was not curious about the balance. She was testing to see if your people understood what they had. Admiral stood very still. Her scales had stopped moving entirely. And do we understand what we have? Han smiled again, still not a happy smile. No, he said, you do not, but you are starting to. The training facility was on the lowest level of the academy. It was designed for dangerous exercises. The walls were reinforced with materials that could survive explosions. The floor could be cleaned of blood and rebuilt within hours. Medical teams waited behind armored glass, ready to respond to injuries. Park had been summoned here without explanation. When she arrived, she found that she was not alone. Admiral stood near the observation window, her silver scales catching the harsh lights. Instructor was there too, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. Several high-ranking officers from different species watched from elevated platforms. And in the center of the training floor, a massive figure waited. Of the Dominion. Had studied thee in her xenobiology classes. They were the most feared close combat species in the galaxy. 8 feet tall, bodies covered in natural armor plates that could stop bullets, claws that could tear through starship metal, reflexes faster than any organic species on record, that had never lost a hand-to-hand battle in their entire history. Looked at with eyes that glowed faint orange in the training lights. His mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth designed for ripping flesh. So this is the human who thinks she knows about blades, he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Little creature, soft skin, weak bones, your ancestors played with sharp metal because they had nothing else. My ancestors were already conquering worlds when your kind was still living in caves. Said nothing, she waited. Admiral stepped forward. Cadet Park has requested a demonstration. He does not believe the historical records we recovered about human blade combat. He wishes to see for himself. Looked at the massive warrior. He was 4 times her weight. His natural weapons were more dangerous than any sword. His species had 10,000 years of combat evolution. What are the terms? She asked. Laughed. The sound echoed off the reinforced walls. First blood, little human, I will use my claws. You may use any blade you choose from the weapons provided. He gestured toward a rack against the wall. When I cut you, the demonstration will be over. Then perhaps you will understand why they do not fear sharp metal. The officers on the platforms exchanged glances. Several of them looked uncomfortable. First blood against a typically meant serious injury. Their claws were so fast that most species could not even see the attack coming. This match was not fair. Everyone knew it. Everyone except perhaps the human. Walked to the weapons rack. She examined the blades carefully, testing weight and balance just as she had in the lecture hall. She passed over the straight swords and the long blades. Her hand stopped on a shorter curved weapon. It was a Korean cavalry sword designed for mounted warriors. Made a sound of contempt. That tiny thing, against armor, you might as well fight me with a dinner knife. Did not respond. She carried to the center of the training floor. Her feet found their position naturally. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing slowed. She settled into a stance that looked almost relaxed. In the observation area, Han watched with careful eyes. He recognized the stance. It was called the middle guard. It was a position of patience and balance, a position for someone who planned to wait for their enemy to make the first mistake. The do not make mistakes thought, but he did not look away. Admiral raised her hand. The match begins on my signal. First blood ends the contest. She paused, giving both fighters a chance to reconsider. Neither moved. Begin. Charged. 800 pounds of armored predator crossed the training floor in less than 2 seconds. His claws extended, gleaming under the harsh lights. His attack was a classic opening, a sweeping strike designed to remove the head or arm of his opponent. It was fast enough that most species would be dead before their brains registered the movement. Moved. She did not retreat. She did not dodge to the side. She moved forward into the attack, dropping low beneath the path of the claws. The traced an arc through the air. It looked almost lazy. It looked almost gentle. His arm hit the floor before he understood what had happened. The stumbled, his momentum carrying him past where had been standing. Green blood sprayed from the stump where his limb had been attached. The severed arm lay on the training floor, claws still extended, still twitching with residual nerve signals. Silence filled the facility. Stood in her original position. Her breathing had not changed. The in her hand was wet with green blood, but her grip was still relaxed and controlled. She had not moved more than 3 steps during the entire exchange. "First blood," she said quietly. The medical teams rushed onto the floor to help. Could survive such injuries. They could regrow limbs given enough time and medical support. But that was not the point. The point was that no warrior in galactic history had ever wounded in single combat. Until now. Stared at his severed arm. Then he stared at. His orange eyes held an expression that the observers had never seen on a face before. It took them a moment to recognize it. "Respect." Hal asked. The medical team was applying emergency sealant to his wound, but he ignored them. His entire attention was focused on the small human female who had just done the impossible. "My attack was perfect. My speed was optimal. No organic species should have been able to counter that strike." Cleaned her blade with a cloth she had brought in her pocket. Her movements were calm and practiced. This was a ritual she had performed thousands of times. "Your armor has gaps at the joints," she said. "Your attack pattern telegraphs 2 moves ahead. Your weight distribution during the charge shifts your balance point forward." She sheathed the sword. "And you have never fought anyone who was not afraid of you." Process this information. You were not afraid. "No." "Why not? You knew what I could do. You knew that one mistake would mean your death." Looked at him directly. Her dark eyes were calm and steady. "My ancestors learned to fight scared a very long time ago. They faced enemies with better weapons, better armor, better numbers. They faced cavalry charges and arrow storms and siege engines. They learned that fear is just a feeling. It does not have to control what you do." She paused. "I was afraid. I just did not let it matter." In the observation area, Admiral turned to her aide. Her scales were moving so rapidly that they made a soft clicking sound. "Get me the Coalition Defense Council," she said. "Tell them we need to reclassify human close combat capabilities immediately. And tell them," she paused, watching Park walk toward the exit with her borrowed sword. "Tell them I believe we have been making a serious mistake in how we understand this species." Instructor had not spoken since the match began. His 4 arms hung loose at his sides. His 6 eyes were fixed on the spot where had made her cut. "The blade," he said finally. His voice was very quiet. She knew exactly where to strike, how deep to cut, how to angle the edge so it would pass through the joint cleanly. He turned to look at Han. "How long does it take to learn that kind of precision?" Considered the question carefully. Her family has been training for 700 years, started when she was 4 years old. She practices for 3 hours every day, even now. He watched disappear through the exit door. But the techniques she used today are much older than her family. They were developed over thousands of years by millions of practitioners. She is just the latest person to carry them. Was silent for a long moment. Then he asked another question. "The records we found. The battles where small groups of humans defeated larger armies. The blade masters who killed hundreds of opponents." He paused. "We thought those were exaggerations, primitive propaganda. Were they real?" Smiled slightly. It was the same not quite happy smile he had shown in the archive room. "Is one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy," he said. "He has killed over 2,000 enemies in personal combat. He has never been wounded before today." He gestured toward the green blood still staining the training floor. A 23-year-old human female just took his arm in less than 3 seconds using techniques that are 600 years old. He looked at Instructor with something that might have been sympathy. The records are real, said, all of them, and Park is not even close to being the best blade fighter our species has produced. He paused. She is just the best one you have met so far. Felt something he had not experienced in 200 years of teaching at the academy. He felt uncertain about everything he thought he knew. The Coalition Council Chamber was the largest room in galactic civilization. It was built to hold representatives from over 40 species. The ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed in the upper sections. The walls were decorated with monuments to ancient victories and treaties that had kept the peace for. Today, the chamber was filled with fear. General of the Defense Force stood at the central platform. His gray skin was pale with exhaustion. His large black eyes had dark circles beneath them. He had not slept in 4 days. None of the military leaders had slept. They had been too busy watching their colony worlds burn. They have destroyed 6 worlds in the past month, said. His voice carried through the vast chamber through thousands of hidden speakers. Caldera 4, Prime, the settlements, the mining colonies of Sector 7. Estimated civilian casualties exceed 400 million. Murmurs rippled through the gathered representatives. 400 million lives. It was a number too large to understand. It was a number that belonged in history books, not in current reports. We have deployed every weapon in our arsenal, continued. Plasma cannons, graviton missiles, nuclear warheads, antimatter torpedoes, none of them work. He activated the main display. Images appeared showing the enemy. There were machines, not robots controlled by organic minds, but true artificial intelligences that had evolved in the darkness between galaxies. Their bodies were built from metals that did not exist in Coalition space. Their weapons used energy frequencies that Coalition scientists could not identify. But their most terrifying feature was their shielding. They have developed adaptive protection systems, explained. When we fire energy weapons at them, the shields absorb the frequency and reconfigure to block it. When we fire kinetic weapons, the shields analyze the velocity and density and adjust to deflect future attacks. He paused. They learn from every shot we take. Within minutes, they become immune to whatever we use against them. The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives shouted questions and accusations. Some demanded more military funding. Some demanded surrender negotiations. Some simply screamed in wordless terror. Quiet, Admiral's voice cut through the chaos. She had been sitting in the human observer section, a small area in the back of the chamber that had been added only recently. Now she stood and walked toward the central platform. General, may I present additional information? Looked surprised. Was a respected officer, but she was not on the agenda. Protocol demanded that speakers wait their turn, but protocol seemed less important when civilization was ending. He nodded and stepped aside. Admiral took the platform. Behind her, a group of humans entered the chamber through a side door. They were not politicians or diplomats. They were soldiers. 40 men and women in simple gray uniforms, moving with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly what they were capable of. Their leader was a Korean man named. His service record was unremarkable by galactic standards. He held the rank of captain. He had served for 15 years in the human colonial defense forces. His file did not mention that his family had maintained an unbroken sword tradition for 700 years. It did not mention that he was considered one of the greatest living masters of Korean blade arts. Some things were not written in files. We have reviewed the combat footage, said. His voice was calm and clear. He spoke like someone discussing weather patterns, not extinction-level threats. Their shielding adapts to energy frequencies. Their reaction time exceeds organic baselines. Their armor is resistant to kinetic impact from modern weapons. He paused and looked around the chamber. Thousands of alien eyes stared back at him. Most of them had never spoken to a human before. Most of them considered humans to be a minor species, barely worth noticing. Reached into his uniform and removed an object. It was a sword. The blade was old and worn, showing marks from centuries of use. The handle was wrapped in leather that had been replaced many times, but the metal still gleamed under the chamber lights. It was still sharp. Modern weapons, repeated. Their shields are calibrated for modern weapons, energy beams, plasma bursts, high-velocity projectiles, weapons that follow predictable patterns, weapons that machines can analyze and counter. He held up the sword. This is not a modern weapon. The chamber was silent. Every representative stared at the simple metal blade in the human's hand. It looked primitive. It looked useless. It looked like something from a museum, not a war council. Human blade techniques were developed specifically to be unpredictable, continued. We spent 11,000 years fighting each other. We learned that enemies adapt. We learned that patterns get you killed. So we created methods that change constantly. Strikes that come from unexpected angles. Movements that look like retreats but are actually attacks. Techniques that seem impossible until suddenly you are bleeding and you do not know how it happened. He placed the sword on the council platform. The shields have no defense against low-velocity physical penetration. Their reaction systems are optimized for threats that move in straight lines. Their adaptive programming has never encountered an enemy that uses techniques refined through 5,000 years of human killing human. He met Admiral's eyes. We can hurt them. General stepped forward. His expression was a mixture of desperation and disbelief. You are suggesting we fight machine intelligences with swords. Captain, these things have destroyed battle fleets. They have conquered entire planets. They move faster than any organic species can track. Nodded, yes, they are very dangerous. Many of my people will die. Then why would you volunteer for this mission? Looked at the other humans standing behind him. Their faces were calm. Their eyes were steady. They knew exactly what they were being asked to do. Because someone has to hold the line while you figure out how to win this war, said. They are approaching coalition core worlds. Within 6 months they will reach populated systems. Within a year they will reach Earth. He turned back to face the council. We cannot stop them permanently with swords, but we can slow them down. We can bleed them. We can teach them that killing humans has a cost. He gestured toward his soldiers. These warriors did not volunteer expecting to come back. They volunteered because they understand something that most species have forgotten. Sometimes survival is not about winning. It is about making your enemy pay so much for victory that they wonder if it was worth the price. The chamber remained silent. Representatives looked at each other with uncertain eyes. This was not how galactic warfare worked. This was not rational strategy. This was suicide with sharp metal. But what other options did they have? Admiral spoke into the silence. The human proposal has been reviewed by coalition military analysts. Their assessment is that sword-based assault teams may be able to achieve localized victories against ground forces. The machines have not encountered this type of attack before. They will need time to adapt. How much time? Someone asked. Unknown, possibly weeks, possibly months. Every day we delay the advance gives our scientists more time to find a permanent solution. Looked around the chamber. I recommend we approve Operation Drawn Steel, authorize human blade teams to engage forces on occupied worlds. General raised another question. How many human warriors are available for this operation? Answer, 2,000 have volunteered for the first wave. That is enough to retake 1 colony world, maybe 2. After that, we will need to train more. How long to train new sword fighters? For basic competence, 6 months. For the level of skill needed against the paused. Years, decades. These techniques are not learned quickly. A representative spoke from his section of the chamber. Since its defeat, they had been paying close attention to humans. You are asking us to approve a mission where most participants will die, using weapons that are thousands of years old, against enemies that have never been defeated. This is madness. Turn to face him. Yes, he said simply. It is. But human history is filled with madness that worked. 13 ships against 300. 300 warriors against an army. Sometimes the only sane response to an impossible situation is to do something insane and hope your enemies cannot adapt fast enough. He picked up his sword from the platform and held it carefully. My ancestors carried blades like this against cavalry charges, against armored knights, against gunpowder weapons. Every time technology changed, people said the sword was finished. Every time someone found a new way to make it work. He looked at the representative directly. They are just another challenge. My people will find a way to cut them. We always have. The vote was called. For the first time in galactic history, the coalition approved a military operation using melee weapons against a technologically superior enemy. Operation Drawn Steel was authorized within the hour. As the council chamber emptied, stood alone on the central platform. He looked at the sword in his hands. It had belonged to his great-great-grandfather. It had killed Japanese soldiers during the occupation. It had been hidden during the wars. It had been passed down through generations, always maintained, always sharp. Now it would taste machine blood. Bowed his head slightly, honoring the weapon and the ancestors who had carried it before him. Then he walked out of the chamber to prepare his soldiers for war. Behind him, the empty platform stood in silence. The only evidence of what had happened was a single sword mark scratched into the ancient stone. Had made it without thinking, a small gesture to mark the moment. It was the first mark humans had ever left in the Coalition Council chamber. It would not be the last. The drop pods fell through the atmosphere of Caldera 4 like metal rain. Inside each pod, a human warrior sat in darkness, holding a blade across their knees. They did not speak. They did not need to. Every one of them understood what was waiting below. Park felt her pod shake as it hit thicker air. Through the small window, she could see the colony world growing larger. Once it had been beautiful, green forests, blue oceans, cities filled with millions of coalition citizens. Now it was burning. They had taken Caldera 4 3 weeks ago. Their ground forces patrolled the ruins of cities. Their harvesting machines stripped resources from the planet's surface. Coalition intelligence estimated 30,000 machine units occupied the world. 2,000 humans were coming to take it back. Spod hit the ground with a crash that rattled her teeth. The door exploded outward automatically. She was moving before the dust settled, her feet carrying her out of the wreckage into the gray light of a dying world. Around her, other pods were landing. Human warriors emerged with weapons ready. They formed into groups without needing orders. They had trained together for 3 weeks straight. They knew their positions. They knew their targets. They knew they were probably going to die. The first appeared from behind a collapsed building. It was 8 feet tall, made of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Its body was covered in weapons, plasma emitters, kinetic launchers, cutting blades that hummed with energy. Its sensors locked onto immediately. She charged. This programming assessed the threat. A single organic creature running toward it with a primitive metal weapon. Threat level, minimal. The machine raised its plasma emitter to eliminate the nuisance. Its blade cut through its arm before it could fire. The stumbled backward, processing data that did not match its combat models. Organics did not move this fast. Primitive weapons did not damage armor. Something was wrong with its calculations. Gave it no time to adapt. Her sword found the gap between its chest plates. The blade sank deep into its internal mechanisms. Sparks flew. The machine collapsed. 6 seconds, one enemy down. pulled her blade free and kept moving. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of combat spreading across the battlefield, metal screaming as it was cut, machines falling, humans shouting battle cries in a dozen languages. The liberation of Caldera 4 had begun. The battle lasted 3 days. They tried to adapt. They adjusted their sensors to track the humans. They reconfigured their armor to resist physical penetration. They changed their movement patterns to counter the unpredictable sword techniques. It was not enough. Every time the machines adapted, the humans changed their approach. They used techniques that had been developed centuries apart. Korean sword forms flowed into Japanese styles. European methods mixed with Chinese straight sword techniques. The humans carried 5,000 years of combat evolution in their muscles and their minds. The machines had only weeks to adapt. They needed years. By the end of the third day, 12,000 units had been destroyed. The human casualties were heavy. 800 warriors had fallen, but the remaining soldiers held the central city. The colony world was free. Stood in the ruins of what had once been a park. Her uniform was torn. Her arms were covered in cuts from close calls that had almost killed her. The sword in her hand was wet with machine lubricant. She had lost count of how many enemies she had destroyed. Around her, the surviving humans gathered. Some were crying. Some were silent. Some were already cleaning their blades, preparing for the next battle. They knew this was not the end. This was just the beginning. Captain walked through the ruins to join them. He had fought on the front lines with his soldiers. His family sword was chipped in 3 places from cutting through armor, but he was alive. He was still standing. Caldera 4 is secure, he announced. His voice was tired but steady. Coalition relief forces will arrive within 12 hours. Our mission here is complete. The soldiers did not cheer. They simply nodded. Cheering felt wrong when so many of their friends had died. The war against the lasted 3 more years. Human sword units became the coalition's most valuable tactical asset. They were sent to every contested world. They trained other species in basic blade combat. They developed new techniques specifically designed for fighting machines. They died in terrible numbers, and they kept volunteering. Park became a legend. She fought on 7 different worlds. She killed more than any other individual soldier. Coalition news services called her the Blade of Humanity. She did not like the name. She was just doing what her family had done for 700 years, what humans had done for 11,000 years. She was surviving by cutting down everything that tried to kill her. On the final day of the war it was not really a world. It was an artificial structure, a vast machine built around a dying star. The last command center was hidden somewhere in its depths. The coalition fleet surrounded it. Human blade teams had fought their way through its defenses. Was 30 years old now. Her body was covered in scars. Her original sword had broken 2 years ago on a world called Terminus 7. The weapon she carried now was new, forged by human smiths on a coalition station using techniques that were 800 years old. The blade did not care that it was young. It remembered what it was supposed to do. The final command center was a small room filled with machines. The last intelligence unit waited inside. It was different from the combat units. Smaller, more delicate. It had never been designed for fighting. It had been designed for thinking. Why? It asked as entered the room. Its voice was artificial but somehow sad. Why do you fight like this? You could have developed better weapons. You could have built shields and drones and automated systems. Instead, you run at us with sharpened metal. You die in ways that could have been prevented. I do not understand. Approached slowly. Her sword was ready, but she did not attack immediately. The machine was not threatening her. It was asking a genuine question. We tried better weapons, she said. They did not work against your shields, so we used what we had. But you had already abandoned these techniques. Our analysis of human history showed that blade combat was declining. Your species was moving toward ranged weapons and automated warfare. You were becoming like the rest of the galaxy. The machine's sensors focused on her blade. Why did you go back? Considered the question. It was a good question. She had asked it herself many times during the long years of war. Because the blade is not just a weapon, she said finally. It is a connection. When I hold this sword, I am holding 5,000 years of my people learning how to survive, how to protect the things that matter, how to face enemies that want to destroy us and say, not today. She lifted the blade so the machine could see it clearly. Your species builds weapons to kill enemies. My species builds weapons to remember who we are. She paused. The blade remembers even when we try to forget, and when everything else failed, we remembered too. The machine was silent for a long moment. Its processes were running calculations that could not see. Finally, it spoke again. I think I understand, it said. You are not just fighting us. You are fighting extinction. Not just physical extinction, but the extinction of what makes you human. Its sensors dimmed slightly. We cannot adapt to that. We can only destroy bodies. We cannot destroy what you carry inside. Nodded, then she raised her sword and ended the war. Months later, the coalition built a monument on Caldera 4. It was dedicated to the human warriors who had died in the Blade campaigns. The names of 8,000 soldiers were carved into black stone. At the center of the monument stood a statue of a single figure holding a sword. The figure was not Park. It was not Captain. It was not any specific person. It was simply a human standing in a fighting stance, ready to face whatever came next. At the base of the statue, a plaque held words translated from an ancient Korean military manual. Those who seek death will live. Those who seek life will die. Below that, in smaller letters, this is why human blades are balanced the way they are. They were made by people who understood that sometimes the only way forward is through. At the Galactic Military Academy on Orbital Station 7, Instructor removed his old weapons display. In its place, he built a new exhibit. He called it Human Blade Arts, a living tradition. The centerpiece was a sword that Park had donated after the war ended. It was the blade she had carried on the final mission. The blade that had ended the... It looked simple. It looked primitive. It looked like something a child might make from scrap metal. Cadets from 40 different species came to study the exhibit. They looked at the blade, and they did not understand how such a simple object could matter so much. But they were starting to learn. And somewhere in the galaxy, human families continued their training. Fathers taught sons. Mothers taught daughters. Masters passed down techniques that were hundreds of years old to students who would carry them into the future. The blades were cleaned and sharpened and maintained. Because the blade remembers. And so do the people who carry them.